I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. We're meeting on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I had a little bit of trouble with the theme, Forever Young. Not just because it's like 8:15 or whatever time it is, and I made friends with half a bottle of wine last night. Because Forever Young kind of implies hope. And that isn't quite something I think of lately when I think of being young. I think it's a very difficult time to be a young person. Not just because of things that happen in the news. I assume we have a lot of students here, and so every student who you know is already up on things like cuts to education and increased uni fees and all that kind of stuff. And that is very serious, and it's something that kind of affects the mood. But I think it's something deeper. If you are a student now, or if you remember back when you were a student, there was a way people talked about you and at you that really kind of sums up how I think Australia treats its young people. Essentially, the message you get before you're, I don't know, say 25, late 20s, before you hit that period where you've got a 9-to-5 job, you've put down a mortgage on a house, the message is you're useless. You don't count yet, because you haven't ticked X, Y, Z. If you rent, no. If you're a student, you're bludging. If you still live at home, because you can't afford astronomical rent prices in Sydney or Melbourne or wherever it is that isn't a 2-hour train ride away from where you work or go to school, you're a man-child, you can't take care of yourself on your own, you're self-obsessed, you're obsessed with social media, why don't you go change the world? What's wrong with you in general? It comes up like on the page of the Daily Telegraph pretty much every time the Telegraph publishes something. And so it's it gets to you, eventually. It gets to you. When you're told by society over and over again that your opinion is not worth as much as somebody else's, you start to believe it. There's this fantastic Australian poet, Omar Musa, who, in his poem, My Generation, he's about 30, he said, my generation grew wearier but not wiser. My generation grew older but not up. And I think that kind of sums it up. So the question is, what do you do about that? If you're a student or you're young, how do you prove to yourself and to the world, but more importantly yourself, that you do matter? And I don't have an answer for you, unfortunately. Part of what I do, about, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, I took a job with an online news outlet called Junkee, who are best known for things like cat videos. I think if I could sum up Junkee in 5 words, it would be cat videos and Scott Ludlam. Yep, I think that's about it. I freelanced for Junkee for a little while in the first 6 months of this year. And so I was sitting at home pretty much being a student. I was simultaneously failing an arts degree and being a freelance journalist and not having a proper job. So I was kind of pretty low on the rung of things society expects out of, its young people. And while I was freelancing, Junkee, on a whim, sent me over to WA to cover Scott Ludlam's election campaign, his re-election campaign, his re-election campaign, whatever it was, in the last week of March. And so I followed him around for about 5 days, and he seemed like a nice guy. And then it came through that he'd won, and we were in a pub, like a beer garden in a pub in somewhere in Perth, some suburb of Perth, and the room was packed with young people, with people who were our age, who were happy to get pissed and brag about it on Twitter and do all sorts of stupid stuff, but who still had come out for this kind of weird, lefty, nerdy politician, and who had fucking smashed it. He got something like 16% of the vote in WA, which is like a giant coal pit for the Greens, or for anyone who isn't you know what I mean. It's the biggest laugh I've gotten so far. That's good. It was phenomenal, and it wasn't anything new. It wasn't anything, there was no gimmick about it or anything. It was a bunch of people, like a bunch of young people saying, fuck it. I know, like I've come to realize that my future's getting shafted by the people who are nominally in charge of it, by people, whether it's in government or the media or business, who do not care that in 30 years I'm going to have to be dealing with the effects of climate change, or that I'm going to have to deal with rising economic inequality. And if I let it continue by myself, I'm going to be stuffed. I'm going to be so stuffed. And my kids, if I decide to have kids, are going to be stuffed. And so they came out for him. They came out and they said, they handed out flyers. They've like cold called people. I don't know if you've ever cold called. It's just like ringing people up and go, hey, would you like to vote for this person? And people say no. It's disgusting. It's awful. And they did that week in, week out, and they got him there. And on that night, in that beer garden, he said something that has kind of stuck with me. He said, if you work your ass off and you're clever, you can win. Which I think is the only advice I can give you. I've either gone criminally under or criminally over time, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.